All right, guys, welcome back. Up next, we have our unannounced speaker, Sock. He's been involved for a couple years now. And actually, before he comes on stage, Anthony would like to have a word. So here you go.
Thanks, Herman. Okay. Next guy, haven't promoted him at all. Nobody here, or very few of you do, know who he is. Most of you don't. And I'm going to put pressure on him because I think he can do it. I think this is going to be the most unexpected and surprise speech at the event. It's going to be right off the bat, hitting the home run, and I think potentially one of the best speeches ever given at the event. I have very high expectations, not to necessarily put that on him maybe, but just because I know him at this point and I know his ideas really well from talking to him in person over the past year and a half and from reading what he has to say on various forums we post on. His topic is going to be relationships and then a few other things branching off from that. And that sounds so generic, but this is like so contrary to what you see elsewhere in anything, in say general dating advice or even like hardcore PUA stuff. It's totally either not mentioned at all or it's complete opposite of what you see on the mainstream. So Soc, short for Socrates, is I think has very contrary ideas to what we accept on a very broad scale in society today, no matter where you go. The ideas are essentially right, by my judgment. I think they are outstanding, and if you apply them to your life and the context he gives you, it's me badass. So, with that said, welcome Sock to the stage. Thanks, man. Appreciate it coming.
Thanks. Hi, guys. I'm actually really pleased to be here, particularly proud from a number of reasons. My personal path has been kind of one in which I've stumbled, tried, failed, but it's one in which I was not satisfied with by maintaining the current patterns of behavior. And what I did is I decided to find other men, find friends, and to kind of put myself back together, to look at where I wanted my life to go, and to basically self-educate. And when I say self-educate, I mean steal. I took anything, everything, transferred information from one realm and put it into another. And that has been an evolving process. Some stuff that I started when I was very young to the current date. And it's been very insightful for me, and it's been successful. My name is Sock. It's short for Socrates. It's one of many names and identities that I go by and identify with, and that's really less important than who I am. Who I am is, quite literally, as I stand here before you, I could be your father. More likely, I could be your older brother. Without a doubt, I could be your friend. But the bottom line is, and most importantly to me, is the fact that I can be you in many, many ways. I'm not an expert in my field. I'm not a commercial operator. I'm a ranked amateur. I've gotten good at what I do. I'm particularly proud of that. But the issue is that I try, I stumble, I make mistakes, and I evaluate those aspects, and I apply reasoning to what I do and some insight to what I've done and why. And today what I'm going to try to convince you guys of is that it's going to be a contrarian point of view. And for a lot of the men's organizations, men's community, is that there's some very, very strong positive aspects to interpersonal relationships with women. I'm going to use some really vulgar language. I'm going to talk about commitment. I'm going to talk about monogamy, all right? And I'm going to say them in positive aspects, all right? I will try to not use that so much. I'll use other terms that you're probably more frank with. But it's an aspect of the community I think fails in a number of ways. So a large portion of my speech today is literally going to be about the positive aspects on being in relationships with women, and that means the committed one. I'm going to be looking at several technical skills on relationship development, skills you're going to need in having relationships. And primarily those are going to be filtering screening abilities, your ability to create boundaries, and then the other interesting one is I'm going to talk about your brand identity, your social relationship brand. What are you offering to other women? What are you offering to those relationships with people you do have? Then I'm going to actually look on a very critical skill I think is essential, and that is the aspect of critical confrontations, the ability to actually have a confrontation that has positive results. There's ways in which to do that. There's ways not to do that. Trust me, I've made a lot of foul ones, okay? And so there's a lot of this is from experience. Then I'm going to move on from that, is that the aspect of being able to have relationships. At times you're going to need to know how to end them and then why to end them. And so we're going to cover that. And then for a little bonus that are really kind of out there, I'm going to actually give a kind of a small brief talk and some very basic ideas on that very notion that's very taboo, on getting your ex-girlfriend back. Don't want to do it in every case. There are some positive aspects to do it and some things you're going to want to take into account on why and when to do certain aspects when you evaluate it. All right. Getting back to the main purpose of the talk is literally about the positive roles of interpersonal relationships and intimate relationships with women, particularly in committed relationships. Now, a lot of you are going to be younger. You can practice these skills without being in a relationship. You can actually practice having relationships without being in the committed one. You do it with your friends. You do it with your family. You do it with your coworkers, your bosses. Anybody you have that relationship with, these skills pertain. They're transferable skills. And if ultimately you want to have a relationship, you want to have a wife, you want to have a better quality life, having these skills in your pocket is vastly better than trying to learn it on the job under fire. Trust me, you're going to make vastly different decisions, different reactions, and you're going to behave differently in the heat of a moment. You don't want to be learning in that case because it's going to cost you dearly. And it's going to be more than emotional, it's going to be more than financial. It can change your life. And in many ways, behavioral patterns such as these affects greater society on a whole. How we go through life, interacting with people, reverberates through communities, it reverberates through societies. How we regard women, how we regard ourselves in culture as men and women, those relationships spawn off. And unfortunately, when I bring up the term spawning, we can also talk about children. You know, what are your relationships with children? What type of man were you for the mother of the child? What type of father were you to that child? And these are relationships that will then get projected. So a lot of times I'm going to be kind of flippant. I'm going to be derogatory in cases, but it does not mean I'm not being serious. The other aspect is, this is a serious aspect, but this should also be fun. It's probably one of the most important investments you're going to make in your life. All right? One of the most important aspects of being in a relationship is that you have to be in one to really understand them. No one can tell you what it's going to be like. You can't kind of project accurately what being in a relationship is truly like until you're in it. And on the community side, it'd be very much like a keyboard jockeyist telling you what's he going to do when he approaches a girl, what lines he's going to use, and how it's going to be scripted out. That's great for practice. It's good to have that idea and fallback. It's good to have a plan. But I'm telling you, the shit's going to hit the fan as soon as you get out there. You're going to make decisions, situations are going to change, contexts are going to change, anxieties are going to perform, and contexts in ways in which you're not going to be able to fathom or imagine are going to come up, and you're going to have to make decisions and react to certain aspects, judgment calls, so forth, that you're not going to be able to anticipate. And you're going to make errors. And the issue is you're going to want to have some practice in doing is maintaining these. The better proper skills you have, the better you're going to be able to perform. And they're fairly basic in many aspects. The other aspect to being in relationships, I think, is one of the biggest failures of the men's community. We focus in on getting the girl, but not what to do once you get her other than fucking her. And I think that is a terrible, terrible letdown, because I don't think that's what most people want. And it's why the men's population community groups tend to actually lose its members. Because one of the aspects is I don't think guys go out with the intent of actually going out and getting a girlfriend. They end up with one. Worse yet, they end up with a wife. You know, and then you find out not only do they end up with a wife, but they end up with a child, mortgage payments, everything else, and that doesn't work. And then you have catastrophic loss. You have, people are getting hurt. Another aspect on interpersonal relationships is it's going to be probably the second most important investment you make in your life. The first is what you're doing right now. You're investing in yourself, you're investing in your education, you're investing in your life, and developing those skills, getting exposed to different ideas, making connections with other people, other members of the community. These are very, very essential elements to your development, and these things are you control. Relationships you can also control. And there are going to be skills in which you're going to be able to filter out people, look for certain aspects, but ultimately you need to treat it like an investment, because ultimately it is. Your time, resources, energy, they're commodities. How you spend them connotates value. And I'd hate to have you sit down and not value yourself to the point that you just take what's handed to you, take what you're able to get. I think we should be able to look for certain things, enjoy our lives, enjoy other people's company, and actually look to get the best that we can for our value and our worth. And I think too many times men are sold short by not only themselves, culture and society are teaching you to sell yourself short. And I'll cover a little bit of that later on. The other important aspect to interpersonal relationships is the idea of a psychological mirror. Relationships are phenomenal mirrors to your own self-psyche. Of what we end up doing is we project on a subconscious level undeveloped needs or desires or aspects of our own personality that are unresolved into the relationship when we look to fulfill them. You'll hear them in women's culture, the simple term, "you complete me." Women are very cognizant of that. Men typically are not. You'll find other aspects, who you choose to date, who you choose to bring into your life, who you allow to enter in your life, how you spend that time, how you value those aspects, are all value and judgment aspects that reflect upon your ideas and your sense of the world, your sense of self-entitlement, what you expect for yourself, what you expect for your life. They're terribly eye-opening. And if you spend time to actually look at the natures of your relationships, you can tell a lot about an individual. You can tell a lot about yourself. The biggest issues is when you start to have trouble in the relationship, or when there's a failure of one, or when you start looking at your emotional needs. Relationships, again, are amazing mirrors to that self-reflection. You can find and discover a tremendous amount of yourself about that, and they're signs to sit down and say, these are things I need to look at, these are elements I should study, these are elements I should probably investigate a little bit further to actually get a better handle on myself, my life, and why I'm doing this. We also can look at, the psychological mirror for your personal baggage. At no point can we all sit down and say we're all innocent. You've had issues, you've been hurt, you've been scarred. We all come with a number of things. Relationships can help underscore some of these issues. Looking into handle these will actually free you up in a number of ways. And many of them can be very, very heady, and it can have a tremendous amount of emotional weight. You don't need to be carrying that. And relationships can actually help you discover these aspects in your own behavior and insight and how you regard them. And so in that regard, cleansing yourself of that, I think, are phenomenal. The other aspect is your ability to use a relationship as a testing ground. What are your interpersonal skills like? How are you able to communicate? How much empathy are you able to show? Are you able to relate with other people? Are you a selfish individual? And there are amazing testing grounds to sit down and say, I want to learn and develop particular skills, and then utilize them. And of course, this doesn't necessarily have to be just in very intimate relationships, committed monogamous relationships. As younger guys, you should be dating. Okay, that's what these things are for. It's part of an interview process. And you can have a variety of women in your lives and be utilizing these same skills appropriately. Now, these are still relationships, okay? They may not be monogamous, they may not be highly committed. But at the same time, they're still relationships. And developing a better integrated aspect of you is what we're trying to achieve. We want your aspects to be integrated in a very cohesive way. That's also socially and culturally appropriate to your own morals. And it's a tough ground because you're operating often without a net. You're going to be invested. You're going to have something at stake. You literally have skin in the game. And that makes decisions much more harder. There's no reset button like on a video game. God, I wish there was. Let me save to this point, go back and redo it until I actually get it right. Unfortunately, you're going to have to work to a process where you're involved with somebody to the point where you come across that again. That may take time. It may take years. But the idea is you're going to see reoccurring themes again and again and again in your lives until you are able to better handle it. And you don't know if you're going to be able to handle it until life presents you that same issue or a similar issue, and you don't make the same mistakes again. Awareness is not the same thing as knowledge. Knowledge is when you don't do it. And trust me, I'm aware of so many things in my life, I don't necessarily do what I know I'm supposed to. And that's human nature. You can't be flagellating yourself as well. You have to sit down and be a little bit easier on yourself, but to sit down and say you're human. But to be aware of the situation, try better, and when you know better, do better. One of the most important aspects of interpersonal relationships, I feel, is not just all the things I've listened. This, in a very, very serious way, is where the real damage is done. This is where it's going to cost you dearly. This is where your self-esteem is going to take a beating. This is where you're going to get gut-punched with your self-respect. When you put yourself out there, you're highly vested, whether it's emotional, monetary, commitment, any number of things. You are going to be highly invested in an individual in a relationship. Often we project our self-identity in them, and they get destroyed for any number of reasons. One of the sorriest aspects, and we hear people talking about this within society, the breakdown of family structures. When you actually commit to the point that you're married to an individual, have families, and have that, and then the failure. This affects our world community, it affects our society. Learning basic interpersonal relationship skills, I think, is integral to actually alleviating some of that, not only in your own lives, but in the greater aspects of the world in which we live. And in some regard, that's the real seriousness of what we're talking about. The fun side about it is you want to sit down and say, I'm going to have better quality relationships, I'm going to have better quality women in my life, and I'm going to enjoy myself in a manner in which I wasn't free to do before. These are all very real things. On a very selfish level, I'm enjoying learning about interpersonal development within relationships because I like winning the client again. It's an economic business term. It's easier. I'm telling you, the idea of being able to have a woman on a regular basis, not have to go out every day and hunt for your food, bring it home and kill it, and drag it in the house and repeat that process on a daily cycle, it just makes economic sense. Emotionally, physically, everything. I don't want to have to be doing it. Not only that, I'm getting older. I'm not like a lot of you. I don't have, George Clooney's mug. It takes work. And relationships are like that. They're also highly beneficial. And it's not always about the fucking. It really, really isn't. And that brings me to the last point of why I think interpersonal relationships are so critical, is because the highs and lows of your life, the amount of tail you got last night just isn't going to cut it. All right? When you're dealing with professional development, personal achievements, day-to-day grind where you've achieved, you're going to want to share that with more than your family and friends. No matter how close you are, it is not going to be the same thing as when you're actually very, very connected with a specific individual that you share the daily, days in, days out grind with. And that is a serious issue. One of the worst ones is not necessarily when you're alone and you're a high point, because we know they may not occur, but I can guarantee you're going to have low points in your life. Some of them are going to be extreme. I went through one pretty much 3 weeks ago. Wasn't in a relationship, and I felt it. Literally had to face death, loss of a loved one in my life, and it was a devastating aspect. And I had to come face to face with that, be responsible for the terminal care of an individual. And what I wanted more than anything else in the world at that moment was somebody I can be emotionally weak with, emotionally vulnerable with, and emotionally real with. And when you're alone, you're alone. You don't get that back. All right? These are kind of the serious aspects. I don't want it to be super, super serious, but it's things that we don't necessarily talk about. It's things that we don't relate to, and men need to be talking about these things. All right? Moving on from the purpose of why I think relationships are actually a positive aspect, committed relationships, you're going to need to know probably some basic elemental skills. And one of the more important ones, I think, is the notion, literally, of filtering and screening people, of making sure that you don't have to deal with toxic individuals, things you don't want to do, and actually you're dealing with the elements that you want. And if you don't have an ability to screen, you're going to be dealing with everything. The best way I can relate to it is if you go to a restaurant and you order food and every time you get is a garbage plate. Anything the chef could actually throw and slop onto a plate. That's fine as a novelty. Sometimes it's damn good. More often than not, you're going to find stuff that's like, what the hell am I dealing with? On the flip side is you don't want to have your controls so tight that you have the opposite problem where you have a fine dining French dish where it's mostly plate, it's just a little bit of food, it's not going to subside you, and the elements are propped up in an odd way. You're going to have to moderate and to the degree in which you filter and screen individuals in and out of your life, and you better start having an idea of a sense, what do you want to screen for, what do you want to screen against. One of the things that I'll typically do very, very early on is something I'll call the screaming narrative. People project their life story constantly. Watch for it. What are they telling you? What are they telling you by the nonverbal cues? What are they telling you by the verbal cues? And one of the fun ones, I did it last night with talking to a couple of the guys. Ask. It sounds stupid. Look at a girl and ask, tell me about yourself. And if she sits down and says, I'm crazy, I'm wild, I'm out of control, and I'm an American princess, I tell you, I'm going to introduce you guys to her. Okay? You want to stay away from that one, unless that's exactly what you want. But ultimately, if you're looking for a long-term committed relationship, you want to have somebody in your life, those may not be the qualities you want to exhibit. All right? Another one, a psychologist friend of mine, and God, I wish I could pay him every time I use it, is I'll ask a simple question. Tell me about the relationship you have with your father, which incidentally is going to be the longest running male relationship she has. All right? And in most cases, this is going to be the most experience she has with intermale, intersexual relationships. And what you're looking for is not the specific answer, but the tone of it. You know, it's not whether it was healthy or unhealthy. If it's healthy, bravo, outstanding, probably a good sign. If it's unhealthy, really pay attention. How is she handling it? How is she working through it? Or is he just the biggest asshole in the world and he's a son of a bitch? Guess what she's going to do? Reenact that relationship with probably every male she has in her life. You want to watch for these aspects. So that would be the first aspect of filtering and screening. The other aspect is a business notion, and that is that you make your profits at the buy, not at the sell. And the notion there is, what happens is the people you let in your life, the quality of those people that you let in determine the profit margin you're going to have. Most people are not going to all of a sudden break out and have a massive transformation. They're not going to all of a sudden become these glowing swans of fairy tales. They pretty much will move through their life, consistently evolving a little bit, but not a big marker change. And the quality of those individuals you let in your life determine the content of it. All right? And in another way of analogizing is don't let people in. It's almost like taking a train ride. Get on the wrong train, and every stop's going to be the wrong one. Same thing with people. Let the wrong people in. Every stop, every aspect of your life is probably going to be the wrong one you want. All right? Another aspect I'd like to cover is the idea of not giving women a free pass. Too often as men, we do this. They're cute, they're female, I want to show them attention, and we start becoming performing monkeys. That's not necessarily a smart thing. You know, wait and make them earn your respect and attention. Because you're a noble being out by your own right, and we don't treat ourselves like that. Doesn't mean you have to be ugly, doesn't mean you have to be an asshole, but just don't give yourself away for nothing. All right? They won't respect you. They don't understand it, and trust me, they will run with it. What happens when you give something away for nothing? When you continuously do that?
They don't value it.
Bingo. Value yourself first. I think you guys are doing that right now. You're here. You're projecting yourself. You're putting yourself out there. You're investing your hard-earned money in coming and attending a seminar like this. You're interacting with each other. Learn. Steal ideas. Share. Make them your own. All right? One of the aspects I was talking about was filtering is not necessarily always in a derogatory sense of things you want out. Filter and screen for those attributes and abilities you want in. What are the attributes you're looking for? What are the elements that you find desirable? Go looking for those. Don't always do it in a negative aspect, because it's going to jade you. Go looking to find the superior woman. Not necessarily in all ideals, but look for those elements and those gifts that each individual woman will actually have and exhibit. If you can find those and identify those with an individual and pull those out, I think you're going to find a gold mine in many cases. All right? And in stocks, it's looking for a pullback. When people aren't necessarily projecting a particular thing, you can find it. It's like buying low and selling high. That's ultimately what you want to do in an economic sense. But with people, you're having to look at abilities, resources, and values. How they do things, what their skill levels are like, how they relate to everyone else. You're looking for the rare find. And trust me, guys all over, we're competing for that. But I don't think we're actually looking for the same thing. And many times, I think in many cases, we're going to overlook some high-quality stock. We're going to overlook some high-quality people. So don't just screen the negatives, because it's going to jade you. Go looking for the value. And ultimately, that's what I think you should be doing, is looking for the value. because it's a measure of integrity. You know, it's going to do you as much good as it's going to do them. It's not going to bring your energy levels down. It's not going to warp your sense of the world. The last one on the filtering and screening is something I do on a regular basis these days. It's going to sound a little odd. I do two things simultaneously, and I have no problem communicate this with the women I'm dealing with. I try to remove their beauty, as far as what they look like and the validation I may receive by being around them, and I try to throw sex off the table as fast as I can. Then I sit down and look at the individual and I go, what am I dealing with? How do you think does that work with women these days? The women that were downtown last night. Dressed up, looking good, acting in a particular way because they're entitled, because we taught them they've been able to be entitled. They can act a particular way. They can demand drinks. A couple of weeks ago, one was saying, would you mind picking up our bar tab? I don't even know you. Didn't even spend time with us. And her response is, I'm cute. You know, it's like, you're ugly on the inside. But that doesn't come out until you open your mouth. You know, and the issue is, if you can remove a woman's beauty and not have to deal with that, and train yourself, it's going to be hard, trust me, it really is. And remove sex from the table. It's not that you're not interested, that's just not your point. That's just not your goal. Too often I'll talk to my friends and we'll sit down and say, I think the pussy gets in the way of the girl. The girl's the prize, not the tail. Don't be falling for it. What's your objective? What's your real goal? You know, is it the quality of your life, the quality of the partner you want to have in life? How much does sex really play into that? You know, or is it a hell of a lot more? Are you screening for it? Now, the flip side of that is, let's say you do want to go after the tail. By God, go out there and do it. Don't get confused with trading with investing. Don't get confused with chasing tail and having a hell of a good time with trying to have relationships. Don't negotiate between them. Negotiate your time and value and spend it accordingly. The second major skill set I'd like to talk about is about boundary setting, okay? And that is going to be about defining your values through a course of actions, defining your beliefs and values through a course in actions. And that is basically taking up a measure of emotional space, all right? And don't be fooled by the fact that this is really negotiation. And like negotiations, they typically are ongoing. Just because you come to a resolution on a particular issue doesn't mean it comes back up. You can't whip out an emotional contract and go, it says right here we agreed to it. It's going to change. And part of setting and establishing emotional boundaries is to actually understand what yours are. And they're going to be different for each of you. There are probably going to be several common of them, but they're going to be different in each case. The biggest one is going to be a measure of self-awareness. What do you find is a deal breaker? What are not? What are issues you're willing to tolerate? What, again, are not? And again, being in a relationship, being with an individual is going to be vastly different than sitting on the sidelines and thinking about it. But the idea is if you have an idea of what you're going to want, how you're going to live your life, and what you expect others within that relationship frame to behave and behave like, is going to be vastly better than if you have no game plan at all. The second aspect of this is actually setting the boundaries in the first place. Actually having the skills to sit down and define what's appropriate behavior from inappropriate behavior or how to guide that. All right? And there's going to be many skills on dealing with it. You're going to have to communicate it, both verbally and non-verbally. You're going to have that measured expressed. You just can't sit down in your head and go, I have a boundary. And when somebody crosses it, feel bad about it. It needs to be expressed. Unspoken boundaries tend to get violated. So if you have a boundary, and it's an issue, and it's a prime one, communicate it. But you're going to need proper communication skills to do that. Another interesting aspect is the fact that just because you have a value system and have established a boundary, don't expect the world to have the same boundaries. It's kind of what makes it interesting. In many cases, somebody's going to have an opposing boundary view, and they're going to clash. You're going to need to be able to take up emotional space and defend those boundaries. You're going to need to be able to do it on the fly, and this is always going to be spontaneous. It's going to be difficult when you do. It's going to be uncomfortable. The more familiarity you have in doing this, the better your odds are when you have to do it, when you're highly invested in a relationship, probably the better success you're going to have. Another interesting one, and I was taught this by my bulldog, who was notorious for finding the boundary, pulling off, kind of body rocking away, and then coming right back in and making you renegotiate that boundary. Because the reality is a boundary that gets renegotiated, that wasn't really the boundary. He'll move it again. And people are like that. People will actually agree to something, behave it, and then they'll slip. And any of you who have met my dog, he was notorious, absolutely notorious for it. And he taught me a lot by just watching animalistic nature dealing with boundaries on something he wanted. There wasn't anything vicious about what he was doing. It was just natural. People are doing the same thing. I don't think there's a lot of malice intent. Sometimes there are. I don't think there's a lot of cases, but it plays out. And what we want to do is create a better life and a quality of life of our own construct. And part of that is having proper boundaries, having established boundaries, making sure they're established, defending them, and then making sure that you're vigilant. So it's another way of renegotiated boundaries is just make sure that the boundaries you're vigilantly maintained, that there's maintenance going on, you're aware of it, and when there's encroachment, it needs to be brought up. The last is that the notion that boundary setting is actually a skill set. And like all skill set, they're perishable. These need to be practiced, they need to be maintained. All right? Just because you learned it a year or two ago doesn't mean you're going to be as proficient as you are today as you were then. They're a skill set and they're going to perish. It's not that they're going to go down to nothing, but the idea that you can master boundaries or any other skill set for the rest of your life probably is not going to be there. So the idea is you're going to have to be able to maintain these and look for opportunities to do such. Look for specific opportunities to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to do this. Very much like, for example, if you want to be social and you don't want to have approach anxiety, you talk to everybody. And you just get in the habit of doing it. And it's just something you do on a regular basis. Same thing with any skill set. Boundary setting is no different. The last of the three general skill sets that I would like to talk about on interpersonal relationships is going to be kind of a novel one. And that is literally about your brand identity. And leave no mistake, you are both a product and a service provider. Specifically in relationships. Everybody is. You are communicating that brand, your identity. What are you offering? What are the values that you have that women can actually see and perceive and they can come to expect from you again and again as they have dealings with you? All right? A lot of guys don't realize that. They think of their own image, but they don't necessarily think, what is their behavior doing? What are the relationships aspects? What am I like? What's the customer satisfaction response to any engagement you have with people? I literally had a friend when I was living up in D.C., kind of the lark, had a little 4x4 card. There was a customer satisfaction survey of every woman who spent the night with him. And it was kind of a joke. He left a mint. And one of the stupid questions is, would you recommend me to your friend? Very much like what you'll find in your hotel rooms. And it was geared based on that. Now, the interesting thing is women actually fill these out. And it actually became comical to actually have a notebook that he had on his coffee table and flip through these. Some of them were enlightening. I was expecting, quote, I was expecting better turn-down service, and so you get some, relatively interesting feedbacks. And then he actually integrated these into what he was doing. And so he had this idea of brand recognition. And I suggest you guys do the same thing, not necessarily in that form, but realize you're making a promise to everybody that you have a relationship with. It's your employers, your friends, your family. What's your reputation like? How well do you guard that reputation? Are you promoting that reputation? That's a form of advertising. Another aspect that I would be really kind of intrigued with is the fact is, do you know how to market and have brand placement? You have a particular identity. Are you putting that out where that's going to be bought? The best way I could sit down and say this is sit down and say, we all want to meet women, right? Go where women are at. That would be the ladies' room. I don't expect anybody to have any success. Somebody out there is going to prove me wrong. Of cold calling and approaching a woman in a woman's bathroom on a regular day. All right? Having some relative cognizant ability to sit down and say what's appropriate, where are they looking to find me? Where are women that I want to relate to that are looking to find me and are looking to purchase my service and products? Where are they looking to make that take place? That's where you want to go. All right? Again, this is about a relationship, not only just between you and a specific individual, but you with everybody you come in contact with. What are you promising the world? All right? And it's also another aspect is people value sometimes what they don't have. All right? I joke with a friend of mine. Actually, he was a speaker last year, right-hand man, Tim, who gave, I think it was 20 things to not do in your 20s. And I'll be honest, I was probably the individual that he role modeled that speech off of for any number of reasons. It was true, it was harsh, and he was pretty much dead on a lot of it. I could argue with semantics, but the issue is that he was presenting certain aspects, and I can sit down and say that I can look at him in a number of ways and come up with this statement, is that women understand special when it's bought at Walmart. Nothing says special better than Walmart. The quantity guys are marketing themselves. He's a quantity guy. He's a great guy. He offers other things, but he's known for doing quantities. It's numbers. Okay? And don't get me wrong. Quantity guys put up the numbers. I mean, they're staggering. They have some amazing stories. I'm looking to do something different. All right? I know what I would like. Understanding how to place that, how to put yourself out there, what type of clientele you want, what type of clientele you want to avoid, what type of clientele you want to have word of mouth with. Terribly important. All right? I would like to see the difference between, for example, the women that Mystery is being with completely, as an individual, for example, who knows his brand, who's been very successful going after the type of women he wants to be involved with, compared to George Clooney, who's also been incredibly successful, has a great running brand as a male. All right? Notice the two different worlds. And I'm not saying one's better or wrong. Both are highly successful. Both are self-made men. You have the same opportunity here as well. What type of life do you want to live? What type of individuals do you want to have in your life? What type of employer do you want to work for? Do you want an employer? What type of woman do you want to have in your life? And what type of wife do you want to have in your life? I'll even say it goes to your children. You know, those that have children. What's your brand identity as a father? That's your legacy. All right. The next aspect I'm going to talk about is probably one of the most critical skills you're going to have as far as interpersonal relationships go. If I have one thing I want you to walk out with, it's just going to be the next series of discussions. And it's literally on how to have a critical confrontation. And that means an argument. That means when a boundary has been violated, what do you do? And literally, when we talk about critical confrontations, we're talking about the tools for resolving broken promises, failed expectations, and bad behavior. All right? Ultimately, it's not about any one of those things. It's not about the bad behavior. It's not about the broken expectations. It's not about the broken promise. It's about the relationship. How do you curb behavior? How do you rectify these elements and still maintain the relationship? That is going to be critical. One of the first things I would have to tell you, though, if you don't get anything, is stop keeping the peace at your expense. My father was great at it. Jesus Christ! You know, the problem with that is it was apparent. You knew it immediately when you got something wrong. But you're highly, highly defensive in the process. It didn't get you where you wanted to go. The behavior was recognized, but it didn't get him what he wanted. All right? I don't want you guys doing the same thing. But for a lot of people, and I was guilty of it as well, I didn't even do that. You know, and that was part reaction to my upbringing. And consequently, I had a series of ruptured and failed boundaries. And it was very difficult to renegotiate failed boundaries once they're established. So if you just do that, recognize it, take up emotional space, act when the boundary is broached, you're going to be a little bit better off. You're not going to keep the relationship, but you're going to be better off. Don't get me wrong there. One of the things we'll look at, for example, on critical confrontation is the event horizon. And in a common sense thing, the first time something happens, that's an event. It's an anomaly. It's a singularity. I would sit down and say you need to address it right then. They're going to happen spontaneously. They're not going to be convenient. It's going to be a difficult social challenge to deal with, and that's what makes it more challenging. But what happens is if you don't deal with it, they start to slip. It'll happen again. Okay, and then you're dealing with a pattern. When it happens twice, you have a pattern. Not only that, when you don't deal with it, you have time away from it, the value of that incident is lost because nobody's going to want to deal with it. So the value of it's been watered down. It's probably been meaningful to you. It's bothered you enough that you were disturbed by it. You don't want to live that way. The third time that happens is no longer an event. This is accepted case history. This is accepted behavior. You've allowed it. You've fostered it. You've enabled it. This problem is no longer a problem. This problem is now your reality. And it's going to be vastly more difficult to come back, to combat it, to get to a course of action back on a reasonable tack. It's going to be vastly more difficult. When you identify a critical time for a critical confrontation, whether it's a broken promise, a failed expectation, or bad behavior, you're going to need to address it. What I recommend at that moment, and God knows this is where I get it wrong again and again and again, is take a breath, and it's something what we call the hazardous half minute. The first 30 seconds of the next verbal confrontation is going to be more critical than what you actually say. All right? How you say something, the manner, the tone, the inflections are going to be vastly more important than what you actually say. All right? My approach is to sit down and at least I talk to the individual name. It's usually kind of a simple one. Babe, stop, don't yell, don't make it shocking. But the idea is you want to ease into it, recognize it, interrupt whatever's going on, occupy emotional space, but interrupt that train to address that issue. But you need to do it in a very sensitive manner if you're going to preserve the relationship. The other aspect is just that. People need to feel safe when you have a critical confrontation. If they don't feel safe, they're going to get defensive. They're not going to be open. They're not going to be willing to listen. They're not going to be willing to empathize or understand. That doesn't help you with where you want to go. That's not fostering the connectivity between people. That's not helping your relationship out. All right? So people need to feel safe when you approach. So that first half minute, you need to express it. You need to identify the issue. You need to address them. But they need to feel safe in the manner in which you do this. All right? Ultimately, we're going to be talking, it's about maintaining the relationship, not the behavior. You can tolerate the behavior once or twice. But what you don't want to do is lose that element of trust and respect that is integral to a tight bond and connection with an individual. That's the core of a relationship. You lose that, and you're losing everything. All right? Far better to let something slide and maintain the relationship temporarily than it is to jump on something and to destroy it by corrective action. All right? So it takes a delicate hand. And trust me, these are difficult skills to learn and to employ. I suggest you do it with friends, family, coworkers, pets, wherever you can. I'll even say this. Do it with your own self-talk. When you're doing something you know you probably shouldn't be, slacking off, everything else, I should have worked out, I blew my diet, whatever it is. What's your self-talk like? Are you being abusive? Are you treating it with respect? How much kindness and consideration is being exhibited? Are you fostering a healthy relationship while addressing the issue? You need to be doing these things. And again, these are transferable skills, whether you're in a relationship or not. But ultimately, you're going to want to be in one. And these are important aspects to have to be able to maintain the quality and the nature of the relationships you aim for and strive for. All right. The last element to all this, and it's going to be kind of an odd one, is that when you project the element about the relationship and you get them involved in it, and you're asking open-ended questions. For example, babe, why do you think this is acceptable? Not necessarily why are you doing this, but why do you feel this level of behavior is appropriate? Why do you feel that when you sit down and say, I'll be here at a certain time, and you blow this off by an hour, that this is okay? Is this you respecting the relationship? Is this you respecting me? Is this you respecting us? Is this the relationship you want? Ask open-ended questions. Work it through together. Any decision made jointly is going to have a vastly better chance of succeeding than one that you dictate. That's just human nature. And when you resolve that issue, you've analyzed it. There's a phrase called popping the question. It's called verifying acceptance. Let's say she's late, and she said she won't do it again. You talk through it's inappropriate, it's disrespectful, any number. It's not necessarily that serious, but you sit down and recognize the issue. Ask the question, are you going to do it again? Are you okay with this? Get them to commit to the solution they've just laid out. It sounds stupid, but you will know immediately whether or not you'll have likelihood of achieving it. I've had women flat say after an egregious altercation, I'm good enough the way I am. Don't expect this. After working through the whole thing, guess what? You've got a real problem, which brings us to the next aspect. And that is actually making a cut. How many times in men's community do you hear, when is it appropriate to end a relationship? How do you know when it is to end a relationship with a friend? Or when to cut a parent out of your life because it's a toxic or unhealthy event? We don't talk about these things because we don't focus in on relationships to begin with. We kind of have a general idea of when a toxic relationship exists, but when you're in one, you're really invested in ways you don't anticipate. And making the decisions often very, very difficult. It's not pretty. You don't necessarily have all the facts. You don't necessarily have all the answers. You don't know how this is going to resolve, but it's not working. And there's several indicators that you can sit down and spot kind of a dead horse coming. You know, literally when you don't have trust and respect in a relationship, you don't have squat. What you do have is codependency. And if you don't know what codependency is, go look it up. Read. Okay? I know I was guilty of that. Or not say guilty. I was subject to that. And it's so easy to do. It's so easy to become. A lot of male culture teaches you to become codependent. Step up. Be the man. Rescue the girl. Doesn't matter what her behavior is. Culture will reframe it. She's good enough the way it is. How often do you hear about the fact that, is a guy good enough the way he is? No, he is subject to change. Be the man. Step it up. All right? You want it to be an amicable relationship. You want it to be a relationship of integrity. All right? And when you don't have fundamentals of respect and trust, you don't have a relationship. Time to cut it. That's an easy one. Another one is when you have a lack of exchange value. When you're constantly putting in the effort and it's not coming back. All right? It doesn't have to be 100% equal. You don't have to track it. But you know when you're putting in the lion's share, you're doing the heavy lifting, and someone's going along for the ride. It's time to renegotiate that relationship. Well, often it's going to be time to get out. Another one is when you have a lack of consideration. When they just don't consider you. It's all about them. It's an unhealthy relationship. Probably another time to look at it. Probably time to get out. A more difficult aspect, and this is going to be kind of an interesting one. There are being times, and I faced this recently, when your values don't align. It may not be major things. It may be kind of subtle things. And often when you're in a relationship, these will actually worm their way to the surface that you would never recognize in a normal relationship. And much like having roommates, you don't know what people are like until you live with them. Ultimately, with the relationships, you don't know what people are like until you're actually in a relationship with them. You know, you're not dealing with the representative anymore. You're really dealing with them. And often, someone's values comes up. It may be minor, it may be more significant. But the more significant they are, you need to take that into account. All right? And again, it's not either a cut or dry issue. These are all kind of judgment-based decisions. But these are elements that you need to look at, identify, be comfortable with, and be willing to make a decision based on some of these. And again, your decisions are never going to be made perfect. You're not going to have all the facts lined up. But again, you want the majority and the weight of the evidence in your favor on making a positive decision. Ultimately, what does this say about where I'm heading and the quality of life I can expect? All right. We can talk about when relationships are more of a struggle than they are fulfilling. For example, I'm 43 at this point. I like 20-year-old girls. They're great. They're pretty. They're dynamic, a lot of energy. Not worth my time because they're too much of a pain in the ass. I just don't have a tolerance for them. Nothing against 20-year-old girls. They're great. They're being 20-year-old girls. All right? But that's too much of a time struggle, too much of frustration for me to deal with it. Therefore, don't involve yourself with these women. All right? Same thing with much older women that are biased, jaded, any number of things. I don't necessarily need that. Judgment systems. How much struggle are you having to do? How like each other? Are you feeling energized by the relationship? A good relationship is actually going to lift you up. A good relationship, and a healthy one, is going to motivate you to do things to be a better man than you are. We kind of forget that when we're involved with somebody. We get attached. We're used to the comfort. We're used to the familiarity. There's a lot of value in there. We have an aversion to sunk costs, the emotional investment, financial investment, history, the embarrassment. I got to tell family, friends, whatever it is. These are all aversions. These are real things. It's kind of funny to talk to them in hindsight, but when you're living it, they're not funny. All right? And you end up making poor decisions, not bad decisions, poor decisions. And a series of poor decisions, one upon another. Not healthy. It's not where you want to be. All right. Part of knowing when to make the cut is actually knowing how to do it. All right. How many people have fired somebody in their life? Yeah. Not pretty, right? Even when it's coming, it's not pretty. Knowing how to actually make a cut, to be able to look at somebody and say, I've spent time with you, and I don't want to do it anymore. All right? You can be rude. You can be brutal. Friends and I used to joke, you just walk up to her, shoot her in the head, and walk away. It's quick. It's, gets the job done. Not a lot of integrity. It's not caring for the individual. Again, it also doesn't sit down and say, she's still alive. And guess what? In this case, the dead do talk. All right? And what do you think my sexual relationship brand just did? It tanked. She's going to go around and she's going to hear everybody she can talk to, your friends, everyone else, and God knows they will. He just did it this way. Oh my God, I can't believe. I know I wouldn't want to be treated that way. I suggest you guys don't do either. But at the same time, there's a ruthless efficiency on just getting the job done. And I had a close friend of mine who was dating a girl, great gal, just wasn't going where he wanted it to go. Some of the values weren't aligned. Otherwise, they would have been able to maintain it. And she was more than willing to let it ride. Not necessarily healthy, not necessarily productive, but that's what people do. And at one point, he just realized to maintain his own integrity, to respect her, to respect what they have, to respect the memories they created, he couldn't do it anymore and wasn't going to do it anymore. And what he ended up doing was going up to her house, ringing the doorbell. She answers and says, you have a key. And he goes, I know, gives it to her. And he says, I love you, I care for you, and this hurts me to an immense degree, but we're not right together, and I can't do this to you, and I can't do it to myself. Gives her the key, and he goes, I'm going to miss you, and I can't see you again. It's going to hurt too much, it's going to influence me. Hugged her, gave her a kiss, they cried, and he left. That to me is brutally honest. It's equivalent of shooting somebody in the head and walking away, just not as brutal. It has integrity, has merit. All right? Doesn't mean you have to always do it that way. I'm also kind of fond of a relationship where you do want to maintain a friendship after you break up with somebody. I think an exit interview is an outstanding idea. We do it in business. Sit down without passion, give it a little time, and have the exit interview. I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but you sit down and talk about what were the problems did you see, what were the problems I see. You're not going to be throwing eggs at each other. It's going to be emotionally volatile. The idea is not to have drama, but to come to a relative understanding, to have your peace, give her the opportunity of peace of mind and respect, and call it a day. It's an alternative. There's a myriad of other ways. My suggestion is if you're going to get in relationships, know how you're going to get out of them. It's kind of like in business as well. Your first day of business, you better ask, how are you going to get out of business? What's your exit plan? Not that you're planning for failure. It's just not all companies go on forever. Not all relationships go on forever. But having an idea of how to handle these touchy, highly charged emotional settings and having an ability to kind of think it through before you have it, you're going to be a hell of a lot better off than you're in the moment. Because the last thing you want to do is somebody doesn't know how to do it, and God knows I've faced this, of a woman who realized this isn't working for me, is panicking, feeling pressured in any number of ways, and how do you get out of a relationship you don't want to be in and don't have the skill set to get out of it appropriately? You get out of it inappropriately. All right? And I can tell you, to this day, she regrets it. To this day, she's earned the reputation for what she did. All right? I don't like it. I don't like what she did. She didn't have the skill sets involved. I can understand that. I can forgive her for that. But at the same time, I don't respect her for how she handled it. She knew better. She could have acted better, and she chose to do the easy path. She chose the easy, expeditious thing, and that was to behave abominably. All right? Don't do that to yourselves. Don't do that to the relationship. Don't do that to the good memories that you had, because that's kind of all you have. All right? All right, we talked about making the cut. One of the other aspects on making the cut is this aspect of the notion of learning through failures. And you need to be able to understand that failure is often where you're going to find the most growth. All right? And you need to develop a personal culture of personal failure without becoming a failure yourself. There's a great TED Talk by McChrystal who gave a talk just about that. U.S. Military Special Forces commander talked about this idea of developing a culture of failure without being a failure. I learned it in the same place he did in the military. It's paid huge dividends to me, of being able to push yourself to try something new and know that when you push yourself, part of the cost of pushing yourself is the risk of failure. Recognize that as part of doing business. Don't get in the habit of just being a failure, okay? But know that you're going to try, you're going to stretch, you're going to try to actually achieve something you haven't done before. Recognize that you are, and don't beat yourself up when you don't quite measure up to what you expected. All right? All right. Now, part of what we talked about is when you actually make the cut. I would like to follow up with the other end of the shovel, okay? When you actually are the one that gets dumped. And this is where the damage typically gets done. When it's not a choice of yours, you didn't necessarily see it coming, what the hell do you do? All right? The important aspect to hold on to any relationship, especially when it ends, is not to hold on to anything past its lifetime. Don't hold on to anything that's already gone. All right? Part of the analysis here is to recognize when it's time to let go. And that is just basically facing reality. And the harsh reality on this one is she's gone. All right? And it's going to hurt. All right? Which brings us to the idea that resistance to reality is the hallmark of suffering. All right? There's a difference between being hurt, being in pain, and suffering. Suffering is something you choose to do for yourself, something that you take on yourself. You choose to suffer something. All right? Pain you can get through. Hurt you can get through. Disappointment, frustration you can get through. A sense of loss you can get through. These aren't suffering. These are real emotions that are legitimate, that are tangible to an event during a particular piece of time. All right? Suffering, on the other hand, is a willful choice to endure something through holding on to something that's gone. It doesn't have a point other than the suffering itself. All right? I'll also say this. I don't think pain is circumscribable. I don't think you can get around feeling the pain and actually grow and have a healthy life. You have to face this. All right? Part of that is realizing you're vulnerable, you're emotional, you have a sense of loss, you've lost something you were projecting, you have expectations for your life, plans, events, a tremendous amount of assets allocated to future projection. That's normal. You need to allow yourself that opportunity to grieve that loss, to feel that loss, to express that loss, to be able to let it go. If you don't, time will not heal all wounds. Time coupled with healing, and appropriate healing, will heal wounds. All right? Many of them are going to be very, very profound. Nothing more profound than a loss of a family. Nothing more loss than a loss of a wife and a child. Okay? And what's worse than even death, these people are still alive. These are choices they're making because of a failed relationship. All right? Again, the aspect is that you're not a failure just because something did fail. Don't get stuck in that rut. Another kind of aspect I'll hold on to is that even in your darkest hour, it only lasts 60 minutes. Your darkest moment only lasts that long. So as you're facing these immensely difficult and challenging situations emotionally, embrace it and know it doesn't last. Don't sit down and think this reality is going to be your existence. It's not. It's only going to be your existence if you allow it. My aspect is don't allow it to take over your life. Letting go of the relationship, letting go of the woman is about you, not your ex. This is something you do for yourself. And it's an aspect of forgiveness. You can't let go until you forgive yourself. And I'm not necessarily saying you don't forgive her. That comes at a much later standpoint. But initially, you need to give yourself forgiveness. And that is often a difficult task. We're not trained to do it. We're not cultured to do it. But it's something I think is a critical aspect to natural healing, natural growth progression, especially in an adverse situation where you've been dumped. And it's not pretty. It never is. All right, chances are you won't move on until you're actually ready to. All right, and that's terribly telling. I've known I tend to cling on to old relationships, even if I've been years later. You kind of hold out hope. You kind of hold out for something. And often what I realize is I'm holding out not necessarily for that relationship or that individual. I'm holding out hope for the individual I wanted her to be. I'm holding out hope for that relationship in a way in which I wanted or anticipated it to be. And the reality is that relationship never existed. All right? So often I think we cling to things because we wish they were the way they weren't. Recognize the difference between the two. One's a real loss, and the other is a loss of anticipation or desire. Still hurts. But the reality is, when you're faced with it and you have her back, let's say, God forbid, it's not going to be what you want it to be. Now, as far as a breakup, I'd sit down and say there's going to be a number of steps you're going to want to take. The first and most important, especially when you've been dumped, is what I'm going to call she-tox. You're going to literally need to detox yourself from that relationship. The first and most critical aspect to this is don't have contact. Don't write her. Don't contact her. Don't call. Don't stalk. Don't drive by. Don't let her in the house. Don't communicate. Stay the hell away. All right? You cannot get past your time to get through this without having contact. All right? It's a form of addiction. All right? It's a hormonal addiction. It's an emotional addiction. It's a behavioral addiction. And she's damn cute. You liked her in the first place. And it's a solution that wasn't of your design. This isn't what you wanted. You're very, very susceptible. Treat yourself like a recovering addict. It's going to be very similar. Part of that process is to acknowledge it. To acknowledge that you had expectations that were lost. Acknowledge that you had desires and wishes that weren't fulfilled. All right? The other aspect, and I think this is part of something that you don't hear a whole lot of, is start to accept accountability and accept responsibility for its failure. And I'm not saying you're to blame, but take on ownership of the aspects you were. What role did you play in this? What role enabled this sort of to take place? What role did you play to make yourself so vulnerable? Part of that is then looking at it and saying, what can I gain? How do I prevent this? How do I improve? How do I grow? And I think that's what the most critical aspect of the entire growth sequence of healing is, to sit down and say, how do I become a better man for having gone through this experience, no matter how heinous it was? What you ultimately don't want to do is be the same guy you were when you first had that relationship. You ultimately want to be a better man. What can you salvage out of this burning house that you're going to be able to take forward and make a better life for yourself? Often they're going to be very minor things, but they're going to be significant. Sense of pride for having put yourself out there. Sense of worth for having been vulnerable. Willing to engage this. To have lived up to your ideals. Even if you're egregiously wrong, did you live up to your own expectations? These are things you can't be taken from you. They're yours. Don't give them away. Don't throw them away with a relationship, even a failed one. Right? This is where I'm going to sit down and be a little more confrontational as far as what community members will actually sit down and talk about. There's this notion of what happens when you have a relationship. Either you dump her, or more importantly, she dumps you, and this idea of how do I get her back? The community response is, cut her loose, new pussy, it solves all your problems. I'm not a big believer in that. All right? I'm also not a big believer is that she's the one. I don't think there is just the one. There are billions of people, well, probably 1 billion people on this planet. You start doing the numbers, okay, you probably have a lot of relationship potential here. All right? But the issue is that you found somebody that you value one reason or another, and you're not quite ready to let it go, or it's reemerging from a distant past. The question is when is it healthy to reengage in a relationship and resurrect an old relationship? And I think it kind of comes down to kind of a real basic element, is who's fucked up? How much responsibility is out there, and where does the real burden kind of lie? If she did you wrong, behaved abominably, did a bunch of things, and she's coming back, and you're having to chase her, I'm thinking you're putting yourself in a bad situation. That's a high-risk investment. All right? Now, if she had, and she's learned, gone to therapy, worked on herself, proven herself, done a number of things, and she still has value, Consider it. It's an interview process. All right? Same thing with you. How much were you responsible? Did you care and consider her in the relationship? Were you the one that did wrong? And we go back to the critical confrontation when we talk about, or critical conversations when we talk about the event horizon. Where are we on the event horizon? Was it a single anomaly that destroyed and torpedoed the relationship? And most likely, you can probably get over almost anything, okay, if it's a singular event. And in that regard, I would recommend each and every one of you learn how to give a proper apology. That doesn't mean just saying, I'm sorry. It means identifying what was done, taking ownership of that action without question, without justification, without excuse. All right? It means owning it. I did this and it was wrong. Period. Follow it up by acknowledging the damage and harm that was done. Because it was. She was hurt. She was egreged. You're at fault. You can't physically repay, but you can emotionally repay. I know I harmed this relationship. I know I broke this trust. I know I treated you in a manner that wasn't becoming of you because you're an individual that has earned my respect, and I did not reflect that. I was not operating with my own sense of entitlement or my sense of identity. These are not values I hold, and that my actions were counter to that. Then you need to apologize, express your sorrow, and again, pop the question in an aspect, cap it off with, tell her how you're going to change. Don't just say, I'm not going to do this again. Relate how this has affected you. I'm ashamed of my behaviors. And because of that, it's influenced me to prompt me to never want to do this again. All right? In these particular cases, if you're able to do that, and it's real and sincere, you may have a fighting chance. All right? Otherwise, you're going to have to showcase change. Saying you've changed ain't going to cut it. All right? Resurrecting the old relationship again isn't going to cut it. People that have healthy sense of who they are, where they want to go, and want a healthy life don't want the same failing relationship. It's already failed once. Don't repeat it again. Don't propagate the notion, you'll just do better. Okay? We'll have the same relationship and it'll be fine. It's not going to be fine. Intuitively, people know it's not going to be. All right? You need to showcase change. You also need to showcase the lack of neediness, especially in getting her back. All right? I've never heard somebody say neediness is attractive. On the contrary, women again and again and again will sit down and say a sense of confidence is attractive. All right? You begging, pleading, doing all these supplicating elements trying to get her back, not going to work. She may entertain it and may validate her. That's fine. But don't expect a positive, healthy relationship by acting through a supplicating manner. You also need to be able to reestablish trust and respect. It's going to be a little more difficult. That, I think, is established initially by the lack of contact. When a woman sits down and dumps you and says, I don't want to see you again, don't be hounding her. Respect that decision. It's going to be a tough one. If she's willing to meet with you and you say, I'm going to meet you at a certain place, certain time, do that. Don't leave her hanging. Don't throw the women that you've been seeing in her face. And it's fair to do that, but don't do it. Okay? It's not showing respect. It's not going to build that trust. All right? You know, you can play on people's emotions. It may be successful in the short run. It's not going to work out long term. And you're also establishing a sense of behavior and propriety in the relationship. She's entitled to do that to you. All right? I don't necessarily like tit for tat. It's not healthy. It can be insidious. All right? Another aspect is don't dwell on the past. Apologize, make amends, but don't dwell on it. Now, the flip side to this is you want to kind of tap into a little bit of the nostalgia. Relive some of the good times. But don't do it too much. Because in the back of her head and in human nature, we all know how this relationship ends. The story doesn't end well. Dwelling on the past doesn't get you into the future. All right? Utilize it to a minor degree. Don't be dwelling on how you did poorly. Don't be dwelling on how you did her wrong. Cut it short. I've apologized for it. I meant it. But I'm not going to be hounded. I'm not going to be, a whipping post over this. All right? The other aspect is the notion of conscious living. You need to be living your life for you. You need to be living a life women want to be naturally a part of. It shouldn't necessarily be just your sole goal. That women are going to find attractive. That is going to want to lure back in a healthy manner. When she sees you living your life, being the man you should have been and could have been, all right, that's an entirely different thing than saying, I'm going to change. That becomes attractive, especially if she's holding out a little bit of reservation on it. And the last one on this entire talk is when you cap this off, it's not enough to have a life that women want to be a part of. You've got to be able to make that connection with her and that connection with the life you're living and be able to project that in the future. And that's ultimately what relationships are all about. It's about making that connection with an individual, sharing that familiarity, that bond, that trust, that respect, and projecting that into the future. All right? So ultimately, I would sit down and say that relationships are very, very, very positive aspects on human development, on male culture, and I think we need to be celebrating these in many more ways. I think we need to be looking at them. I think we need to be studying them. I think we need to be developing skill sets to be able to have healthy relationships. I think they're going to affect not only our own lives, they're going to affect our families' lives, they're going to affect societies and cultures. All right? You want to be a better man, not just for yourself. You want to be a better man so that you can project that to have a better life. You can have a better choice of a partner. You can have a better family. Okay? Strengthen your family tree. Strengthen your cultural tree. All right? Any questions? Dead silence.
I'm curious, you mentioned at the beginning monogamy and an aspect of relationships, and you didn't mention it again, but I'm curious.
It's a dirty word.
I'm curious as to your views on enacting this stuff. I've done both. I've done monogamy, I've done polyamory or polygamy, and I don't know if it's just that I'm not ready for a monogamous relationship or that it's not for me. I'm not really sure what it is, but I'm curious as to your thoughts on the benefits of just having one woman to have these deep relationships with as opposed to having one or two or three.
Okay. It's fair. Ultimately, you're going to have to make your own decision, and that's going to be the most decisive. It has to be your decision for you. I can sit down and say, when you commit to a woman and you have, commit to not only the idea of a interpersonal commitment, but one of monogamy, you're operating without a net. And anytime you operate without a net and a chance of real failures there, you're going to act more decisive. You're going to have to actually pay more attention to it because you have more at risk. Okay? The nature of that relationship is going to be different. Now, I'll be really honest. I've done similar things as you have. When you have multiple choices, when you constantly have opportunities, I'm going to sit down and say, honestly, you're going to make better decisions. You're going to make better decisions. They're going to come easier to you than if you only have one choice or one decision. But when you're dealing with one individual, you're talking about the nature of not having necessarily picking the better apple off of a tree using a gardening aspect. You're actually talking about tending a garden. You're actually tending to an individual. Okay? And the idea of a partner is in a very real sense here. You're partnered together. And so you kind of have a responsibility and obligation to help foster an environment where the individual is going to basically thrive and flourish. And i.e., you want the same from them. You want them to be doing the same thing. I think there's a level of intensity, a level of commitment to action that you get in monogamy and in a committed relationship that you don't when you have a plethora of choices. And the key in all this is you need to experience it all. Experience dating, experience not dating but seeing a bunch of different women. Experience the idea, for example, of taking a summer lover, of saying, for this summer I'm going to commit to one individual for a little while. I know it's not going to last long, and can relatively communicate that. And that's fair. You're not stringing her along. You're not building up expectations. But to sit down and say, I'm going to dedicate this period of time between you and I to see what happens, to allow something to foster that may not have fostered when there are other individuals in play. And the reality is the less complexity. The more players you have involved, the more complex it gets. And that's just kind of simple math and dynamics. If anytime you have more players, you're going to have more possible outcome and more difficult it's going to be. Not that it can't be achieved. It can be. It has been. And there's case histories for this throughout time. But I think it's something that everybody has to make their own decision of what their life is going to be like, how do they want to live it, and find that aspect, whether it involves being in a relationship or not being in a relationship. You can live a happy, fulfilling, productive life and never been in a relationship. I just know for myself and a lot of other people, that's not always the case. It's why, as a men's community group, we lose a large number of individuals because there's no place for them in the men's community. Once you're in a relationship, you're ostracized. I've been told that very directly. It's not something I believe in. I haven't gone away. It's one of the reasons why I'm staying in here today is to be able to implement that change, be that aspect, support others that think that way, give them an opportunity to flourish.
I had a question that was more of a point of clarification.
Mm-hmm.
You talked earlier about the idea of removing sex from the table.
Yeah.
I guess when you're my question is, are you saying that if you're trying to find a relationship with a woman, then remove the physical beauty aspect from it and
Mm-hmm.
just look at her as a person and decide if you want to have a relationship with this person, and then otherwise, you can pursue the other route of chasing tail and that sort of thing?
Yeah. What I find is when I have a cute girl in front of me, I get stupid. I don't make good decisions. I blather. I stutter. I don't make good decisions. I really don't. And so part of the aspect is, you want to be with somebody of high quality. You want somebody that you're attracted to. So how do you actually get around that? And part of that is just running a mental exercise of ignoring the beauty. Okay? The other aspect is I've come across in so many cases individuals that were gorgeous physically, that were heinous on the inside. And the thing is, I want to make sure I'm not responding to the physical beauty, the glitter, okay, the flash, and I want to respond to the individual. So part of what I actually, physically do is to screen that out mentally. Don't respond to how pretty they are. Don't make comments, God, you're gorgeous. God, that looks great on you. God, you're really attractive. Okay? The other follow-on is to sit down and have the anxiety where you're looking for sex. Okay? That's a human drive. It's a human need. It's natural. But don't make that the goal. Don't be confused with where you want to go and have a relationship and have sex get in the way. Because women are actually very concerned about your ability to commit and exchange. Because a lot of women, the only two things they work with are the exchange in beauty value and sex value. And often what you'll find is they don't have anything else that they bring to the table. And that's a sad story, but you'll see it in a number of different women in a number of different ways. I look for somebody that brings a hell of a lot more to the table. A measure of charm, a measure of intrigue, intelligence, interest, things that I can actually share and banter ideas with, somebody I can trust. And that's going to be exhibited in a number of ways. So in a lot of cases, you need to do this interviewing process, this screening process, and avoid some of the more common pitfalls. Now, the reality is, I respond to these things. And I know it, can't help it. It's ingrained. Don't respond to it when you're having to make decisions. All right? Now, there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't want a relationship, I want pretty women in my life, and I want a lot of sex. We can do that. The pickup community has been phenomenal in developing, fostering this sort of content, fostering the community that way. I think there's more to life. I think there's an enormous market out there for coaches, whether it's lifestyle coaches, pickup artists, or any number of aspects, to sit down and say the real market is not on getting laid. We talked about it last night, about the narrow market niches as far as what a lot of pickup artists will actually talk, whether it's text game, whether it's stripper game, whether it's day game, or whatever. Real narrow category for a very short period of time. What happens when you actually get the girl, when you actually get the relationship? I think there's this huge market out there for guys that want relationships, want better quality relationships, want wives. How do we get them there? How, as men, do we evolve that when we don't have this as far as fathers, brothers, and society helping to teach us, when we don't have these elements to where we can learn and express it? I know I have gotten in verbal altercations with female friends of mine that were very, very upset with the notion that I'm actually speaking to a group of young men on how to be better men. Why does it have to be a men's issue? It's not. It's a person issue. It just happens to be men's in this issue. And we also don't have the resources that a lot of women do. For example, at all universities, you'll probably find a women's department. Study, history, culture, whether it's literature, studies on these things. We don't have that for the males. And I think it shows in our society. I think it shows in our divorce rates. I think it shows in our failed marriages, whether they've separated or not. I think it shows in our failed relationships. I think it shows in how we respond to the sexes. I think it's atrocious. Uh-oh, got one from Anthony. This is going to...
Ball buster one. Kind of. Tim last year, when he gave a speech, Top 10 Mistakes for in your 20s, right, a man, friend of yours, he talked about marriage specifically being a potential mistake, and I think specifically in like a legal context of kind of the legal system being set up for men to fail and kind of get fucked, just to put it bluntly. Do you have any thoughts on that? Maybe circumventing that or how to deal with that?
I can. I've never been married. Never.
Just curious
been,
too.
Yeah. So I don't have personal experience. I can sit down and say in many states it's a contract, a legal contract, not necessarily obviously religious one. The state of Florida believes that. I think that when you partner your ship like that, you are taking incredible risks. I think people vet business partners that they have the same contractual obligations for in a much better way than they do a marriage. Often in business, we're not emotionally at stake. We don't project our sense of identity the same way we do with marriages. So in that particular way, I think the costs are much, much higher. I think it's terribly at risk. I mean, the running joke literally is that marriage is the leading cause of divorce. I think that's true. I also think it's an institution people fall into too readily. I happen to be a believer in it, but I think we do it too fast. Again, I think we end up with people. We end up in marriage. We end up because we were pushed into it by peer pressure. It's not a conscious decision. The notion to sit down and say, I'm going to be financially, emotionally, physically responsible for another individual for life is one hell of a commitment. And as a man, you're making that commitment. And as a man, you have an obligation to fulfill that commitment. It doesn't mean you have to be held hostage to it. I think it's appropriate to have divorce, but I think we do it too often. And I don't think there's a responsible or accepted cultural alternative to other than hooking up. I think it's a shame. But it's convoluted. I know Tim got hurt. I know about that personally. I've seen the ramifications of it. I've seen how he's treated women. I've seen how he's treated himself because of it. And they leave psychic scars. He's not emotionally available. And unfortunately, there have been a number of people in his life that I've met, enjoyed, that he wasn't open to, that his life probably could have been changed had he opened up to it. And unfortunately, this individual was killed. She died in a car wreck. And there's no getting that back. And that'll wake you up. That will wake you up, and make you realize some different things. So I don't think necessarily marriage is inherently bad. I think it's terribly risky. There's a lot of risk involved. I think there's some rewards too, but I think it's a noble effort, institution, if we'll call
it. I've been to every 21 convention event since its, inception prior to 2007. I encourage you to take the stage continually on this, content. I think it's a great direction for the community. And I think there's more power with what you're saying than probably a lot of the men in this room, especially young men, realize. And I think it also underlines the why and why this event has potential to really help men become ideal men. Steve Maitis says a lot that men have forgotten how to be men. And I think that statement is incredibly powerful. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't always necessitate or mean that we go to a club and we can walk in and bang the first chick we see within 20 minutes. Is that really a definition of a man? If that is the definition for you, the community has given you the house to do that. But I think the larger aspect of men and the success of a greater society does not fall in that definition of men.
No, I would agree.
And I'm glad Anthony invited you. And I applaud him for having you, and I agree. Your speech has been one hell of a speech.
Thank you. It's been meaningful to me because, again, I consider myself a rank amateur. I've tried, I failed, I picked myself up, and I tried to learn on every account. And then you join a community of guys, men, guys like yourself that are doing the same. You share and open yourselves up, and I put my content out there, good, bad, and ugly. It's still there. And you learn from it. And some of the best aspects I've learned is when I'm thinking a particular way and I have a close friend that knows the information, can read it, and sit down and go, yeah, but here's something else, and that opens up other doors, and in a way that you wouldn't expect. And to be able to take all this information, put it together and put it out there is kind of a gift back to me because I know I stole most of the content to begin with. I didn't get here because I was just a smart, savvy guy. If I was a smart, savvy guy, I wouldn't have been in that position to begin with. And so it's been a wonderful experience for me to be able to sit here before each of you and be able to express all that information and convey that and to give it to you. And I hope you guys found it of worth and some merit. So thank you. Absolutely. One more.
I really enjoyed that. And I just had one question. Like, how do you transmute your values? Like, let's say you're in a relationship like I'm with a woman I absolutely adore. Mm-hmm. Great relationship. Open relationship, kind of long distance. We see each other every, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And as far as, keeping things growing and, aligning our values, because I said, we help each other grow a lot. So on the few things that you don't really see eye to eye or just different for us, how do we go about mingling those, or should we?
And again, it's going to be a judgment call. The question is, how out of alignment are you? Are they minor issues? Are they significant? Are there things you can live with? I'm not going to sit down and say you're going to find a perfect match. That idea of you complete me, that's a fairy tale. We're dealing with people. They're going to have fallacies. They're going to have errors. You're not going to see eye to eye. Is it a growth element? Is it something that makes you a better individual? And that I think is terribly telling. If it's an issue where it's not going to be surmountable, or it's going to become an issue again and again, or bother you for a while, it will fester, and it will start resonating in the relationship. It will start coming out. The question is, I sit down and say, if it's a concern, also look at why are you staying in it. Is it because you're too secure? Are you being too complacent? Are you really respecting your own possibility? For example, a stock investing analogy would be, just because you bought in at a stock and it's lost some money doesn't mean you hold out until it rises back up. When you can actually transfer that amount, switch boats to a stock that actually will perform, that will break out to get you where you want. The other aspect is you sit down and say, how much do you value it? Is this something you're willing to live with? Are you really that compromised, or is it just a difference? I've dated vegetarians. I love meat. Okay, we didn't see eye to eye on it for a number of different reasons. Doesn't mean we couldn't live together. Doesn't mean we couldn't have a relationship together. I don't know to what degree that lies, but it would be a source to investigate. Look into it. Ask. Talk to her. That's going to be kind of an odd one. Bring it up. Have that open discussion. Bring it to the forefront. But one of the sorriest things I'll say is that sometimes love isn't enough. And that is a horrible, horrible situation to be in. To be emotionally tied, to be emotionally connected, to be involved with somebody to that degree, okay, and not be able to live with somebody to have an honest, healthy relationship. You have to let that one go in that case. And it's going to suck. It doesn't mean you don't stop loving them. It's just that you can't live with them. You can't maintain that relationship in that regard. It'll be toxic. And that toxicity ends up poisoning the soul. And that's not what you want. It's better to love somebody and not be involved with them than it is to live through a toxic event like that. Bonus question.
All right. I just, first off, want to second what the camera guy said. I was, a few years ago, kind of started to get into the PUA community and got turned off because there's no soul. I didn't see it. And what I'm coming across or what I'm getting from what you're saying is you really care about the people you're with, the relationships, as well as yourself. And so my question is like the specifics. You talked about a friend of yours that ended a relationship, and he showed up at this door, and he said, I love you, I care about you, I'm ending this relationship, I'm going to miss you, and thank you.
Yeah.
And you called it brutally honest.
Yeah, raw.
Very raw. And
Incredibly raw.
And
I know them both. Know and like them both, yeah.
Cool. And so what my question is, you know, with the intention of caring about the other person and taking care of them, and the intention of caring about yourself and taking care of yourself and doing what is the best or the ideal, is brutally honest the ideal? Do you feel like that is the ideal?
No. I would hope that you wouldn't have to be brutal, that you could live an ideal, recognize it when it starts to change, and course correct, either into it appropriately or out without having to be brutal. Unfortunately, though, a lot of times you don't know those inflection points. You don't know when it starts to go over until it's too late, and the only way to correct it is to make a harsh correction, you know, such as ending and terminating a relationship fairly decisively. And that one was. And it was decisive from the standpoint that they had done it a number of times. You know, that they had parted amicably, tried to be friends, spent them, something happened, and she came back, an emotional event, appropriately, she was there for him, and then you're invested again as well. But the problem is, just because, again, you love somebody and you're emotionally invested and connected with somebody, doesn't make the relationship right. And in this particular case, the relationship wasn't right. They didn't necessarily have the same views, they didn't necessarily have the same life objectives. He was vastly more social, wanted to travel, see the world, live a little bit more bohemian, take some risk over, not I say risk, travel the world and actually put himself in a foreign location and get lost. She was vastly more conservative. That's a hard one to get over, and she wasn't going to change. And he ultimately wanted somebody that he could share that with. Consequently, he got to a point and realized, I can either live with this individual the rest of my life, and it was likely they would, or make a harsh decision and say, I want something different for my life, and I need to pursue my life for me, and unfortunately, you're not going to be happy doing that. And she probably would have been drug along if he insisted, or if he coaxed her into it. I have no doubt she would have gone. I don't think she would have been happy. And so ultimately, he was, took a guy's responsibility, took the integrity aspect of it, and sat down and said, I need to end this. And I needed to do it in the following way. I can't have contact with you. I wish I could, but I just can't. So,
we can take questions off camera. We got to wrap up. We got to go to lunch. Yeah. So guys, that's it.
thank you.